This episode was originally published in December of 2024.
This is Kent Hance, best storyteller in Texas, and today we have a guest that you're going to love and that you're going to learn a lot from, and it's Merrie Spaeth. Merrie is a friend of mine. She worked in the Reagan White House. She's a professional, and her job and her company is they help you when there's a crisis, and they help you avoid them, and they train you. Many businesses used her, and we've used her at Texas Tech before, and I know she represents a lot of schools, a lot of colleges and universities. But Merrie, first of all, thank you for being on the show with us and letting us interview you and find out how you got to the position you are today.
Well, Chancellor, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And as I've said many times, when you ask me anything, the automatic answer is yes.
Well, I appreciate that, and you've been a dear friend. I want to go back your childhood, that you went to school, K through 12, at a Quaker school.
I did.
How did that come about? Were your parents Quakers?
No, my parents had been to Germantown Friends because when their parents settled in Philadelphia in the 1920s, they were looking for a classical education. And
Right.
the Quaker school, Germantown Friends, provided it. So that's how I got to Germantown Friends. And I and all of my 11 cousins went there.
You and all your cousins.
Yeah.
And what was the Quaker school like? Was it a great school? I mean, they usually have very good educational opportunities for their children.
Well, it was a classical education, very small classes, very hands-on teachers. Of course, it was liberal for its day, but looks pretty conservative by today. We really went there for the education.
You were there to make sure that you were not trying to set social policy. You were trying to learn from the past and the history and what were the basic foundations of a good education.
Right. This is back when we studied Greek and Latin, things that I don't think students even know exist today.
Now, in what grades did you study Greek and Latin?
Latin went all the way from 7th grade through high school.
In Greek?
Just the junior and senior year.
Yeah. And then when you went to college, you went to Smith College, right?
I did, and I'm embarrassed to tell you that I went there because one of my older cousins went and got married, and I figured if she did it, I could do it. But don't tell anybody I told you that.
That's pretty funny. Smith was in Massachusetts, still is. It's not a bastion of conservative thinkers. And how did you come out being pro-business and being at Smith College?
Well, I think that's an example of the impact of one's parents and grandparents. I'm an American story, Chancellor. My grandparents were immigrants.
Right.
I mean, my great-grandparents were immigrants. My grandfathers all, worked their way up. They both have wonderful life stories, which were impressed upon us, as well as what was impressed on us is that you built on the shoulders of your ancestors, and you owed this country a great debt of thanks for taking us in and giving us opportunities. And they preached it then. I believed it then. I believe it now.
Well, that's good. What was there any professors at Smith or any at the high school level that had a lasting impact on your life?
Well, certainly at Germantown Friends, there were people who had a lasting impact on my life, whether it was the science teacher, Mr. Bathgate, who taught Latin and Greek. Germantown Friends had a great choir and a wonderful art program, as well as a deep emphasis on history. You would appreciate this, sir. My junior year, our history teacher, whose name was Pat Reifsnyder, she structured the whole year around a book called They Also Ran. So we studied all the presidential campaigns, and we studied the candidates who lost and why they lost and why. So we learned a lot, but it was very, very interesting.
As a lawyer that was a litigator early in my career, I've always said that the most you learn from trying a lawsuit is the one you lose, because you go back and you examine it closely, whereas the ones you win, you think you're famous and that you're not going to ever make any mistakes and you're going to win every case from then on, and you don't re-examine the real essence of the lawsuit.
Chancellor, I can't believe you ever lost anything. Don't tell me that. It'll ruin the image.
Yeah, well, it did. I've lost a few things. I've won some. I've told this story before, but I've tried. I represented three people. I volunteered to do pro bono cases and cases that were court appointed, and I represented three people on murder charges. My first year and a half, 2 years out of law school, and I got a not guilty, a guilty but 2 years in prison, and a probation. So I learned at someone else's expense, but I did them a pretty good job, and that was always kind of entertaining to me that I was the only person between this individual and a long stay in prison, and that's a heavy responsibility. After you got out of Smith, what was your first job?
Well, the first job that I had actually was while I was at Smith, and it was a summer job for the Philadelphia Inquirer as a reporter, which is where I really got interested in
Now
writing.
you were the first. You were the first woman. I remember this. You were the first woman to be with the Philadelphia Inquirer that they'd taken as an intern. Isn't that right?
That's right, yes. I went down for an interview over Christmas vacation, and John Gillen, who was the editor, said, "This is so embarrassing." He said to me, "What makes you qualified?" And I hadn't worked on the school newspaper or anything, and I said, "Well, I write poetry and I have my own airplane." And he said, "Well, we've never had a girl before. That would be sort of fun." So that's how I ended up. And I just had, I feel as if I had been both blessed and lucky my entire life. And I had just a wonderful break when I worked for the Inquirer, writing a story about murders on the New Jersey shore over the summer with kids who were left alone, and it ended up on the front page of the Inquirer. And I would have gone back to work for them, except that Walter Annenberg sold the paper, so he no longer owned it, and they fired all the provisional employees, which of course included all the interns. And then I bounced around after college for a number of different things, which if you put them all together, make it look like I was a television producer, but actually I was just sort of taking as many freelance jobs as I could to learn as much as I could. And the one I'm most proud of was I had the first produced show on cable television that was supported by general advertising dollars. In 1976, Warner had wired the 5 boroughs of New York City, and they were looking for people to produce content, and they were charging, catch this, Chancellor, $25 a half hour. I don't think you could buy
$25 a half hour.
a half hour. And so I put together about 20 volunteers, and we put together a show. I feel like Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. Let's put on a show called Manhattan Weekend, and we covered off Broadway, new restaurants, street fairs, things like that. And we did spectacularly well with our reviews, but halfway through the first run, our little studio got flooded. So we moved to a new studio, and our revenue stayed the same, and our costs doubled. And that's not a sustainable. Only if you're the federal government is that sustainable. But that's what sent me
Right.
back. That's what sent me back to Columbia Business School. And meanwhile, I had worked for larger groups like 2020. In fact, one thing you don't know about me is one of my claims to fame at 2020 was that had done a documentary on gifted children, and Av Weston and Rune Arledge set me down and he said, "Merrie, you're getting a reputation as a thoughtful producer. That's not good. Thoughtful is not a good word in television." And I just happened to luck into meeting Seymour Heller, who was a fan of my movie, The World of Henry Orient, and he was Liberace's manager. And so I persuaded him to let me do an ABC 2020 piece on Liberace. So I did which is still on their website. I did the documentary of Liberace. Okay. Ta-da!
The documentary of Liberace. That had to be something. And I guess you worked with him a lot and got to know him.
When we were together for a whole week, but I did get to know him. He was the consummate professional, great to work with, a great showman. I learned a lot from him, and we got a tremendous piece out of it. And of course, very flamboyant, as you can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, he was definitely that. And then where did you go after?
Well, that combination of work and going to Columbia Business School, I applied for the White House Fellowship, which is something I'd like to plug to your listeners and to many of your fans. It's a program started by John Gardner under Lyndon Johnson, modeled on the Rhodes Scholarship. You compete for it, and it's got three parts if you're chosen. You spend a year in Washington as the special assistant to either a cabinet officer or another important person.
Right.
You travel for the president, and then the fellows group meets. In my day, it met every day. Now it meets maybe 3 times a week for either lunch or dinner. And the tradition is if the White House fellows ask you to have lunch with them, you accept. So you work your way through the cabinet, the Supreme Court, CEOs like Jamie Dimon. It's a wonderful year. And after I was chosen, I think you know this, sir. I was assigned to Bill Webster, Judge Bill Webster, the director of the FBI, and I was the only non-lawyer on his executive staff. So it was in a very unusual position. But I think I had one of the best years in my entire life. And of course, I came away from that. I hate to see all the bad publicity about the FBI now because the FBI that I know is a mission-driven organization dedicated to protecting the American public and keeping them safe.
They had so many stories in the last 3 or 4 years that were very negative, but most of them concerned a small element in the leadership that abused their power. And you still observe and watch because you worked there. But what is your observation of the FBI at this point in time?
I think you put your finger on it, sir. It's an issue of leadership, which is a topic that you know very well in terms of the importance of leading an organization. And if you have good leaders and a mission driven organization, you contribute a lot. I mean, I trace the FBI's power because most of the FBI agents are out in the field working different kinds of cases. I mean, the FBI's got a very broad mandate, as you, of course, know. But the leadership at the top got very partisan and very political, and they let that color their judgment and their actions. And I'm afraid the reputation of the FBI has suffered for it. But I am absolutely confident that it's going to come back again, and that people will focus on the job that they're doing in whether it's foreign counterintelligence or criminal justice, cybersecurity. All those things are things that are really critical for the FBI to do. It's survived downturns before, and it will survive this, and it will come back to its former position of reputation.
You had a situation where you were the only non-lawyer that was selected in that program at the FBI, and you had Judge Webster that was helping. What did they expect you to do? Did they expect you to do public relations? Did they expect you to do writings for the FBI or what?
Could I make this sound more important than it actually was?
Yes.
Well, when Judge Webster was picked by President Carter to be the director of the FBI, he was a federal judge in St. Louis, and he picked up his chambers, moved everybody to Washington, and turned all of his law clerks into special assistants. And every division within the FBI had a liaison with a special assistant in the director's office. And I got there in the 3rd year of his term, so the pecking order and the assignments were pretty well established. But the only division that did not have a liaison was what they call identification, which is the fingerprint division. And it was starting a process to, catch this big word, automate 95 million paper fingerprint files. So I got the identification department. And I came back after the first day or two, and I said to Judge Webster, "I'm so sorry, sir, but Columbia Business School didn't teach me much about automation or fingerprints. What's my job?" And he said, "Merrie, your job is to make sure that I hear things that people think I don't want to hear or that they don't want me to hear." And within days, in fact, I'm so glad to get a chance to share that with your listeners because my children tell me I repeat it endlessly. That's my definition of leadership. You have to create a system where you hear things that people think you don't want to hear or that they don't want you to hear. And I'll tell you about my first project in those days. And the kids like to say, oh, Mom, that was the last century. Okay. Then it occurred to them it was the last millennium, which they thought was even funnier still. But we had 7,800 special agents and less than 100 women and minorities. And Judge Webster used to say, you cannot police the Chinese mafia in San Francisco with a bunch of white guys from Omaha. And he carried around with him in his breast pocket a card that was updated weekly with the number of minority and women agents. And of course, it was a job that nobody wanted. And so as the newest special assistant, I got the card. So I come back after the first week and I said to Judge Webster, I'm so excited. The numbers are looking really good. And he said, I think you need to go ask more questions, Merrie. So I went back, checked it. I came back. I said, I think we're making real progress. He said, go ask more questions. And eventually I found Buck Revell, the legendary deputy director of the FBI, who taught me how to do it. And of course, once I checked it out, you know where this is going, Chancellor. The numbers were terrible. And so I came back to Judge Webster and said, here's the card. But it turned out that there were lots of projects like that the FBI needed to get done. So I had a wonderful and varied year. And some people who were fellows would see the cabinet secretary once a month. I would see Webster once an hour.
I mean, what a delight that would have been to have that access to someone of that stature.
Absolutely. Can I tell another FBI story?
Sure.
I had just joined the Director Webster's staff, and I guess I'd been there about 2 days. And he would start every morning at breakfast with his special assistants. And he said to me, so Merrie, how are your first couple of days going? I said, well, it's great, sir, except I took the FBI tour yesterday, and there are no women on it. He said, that's not true. I said, I'm so sorry, sir. I was just down there. So he said, show me. So he gets up, no detail, and he goes down to the tour route. And of course, it's the director. Director Webster. So we take the tour and come back, and he's right. I'm right. There are no women. So he looks at me and he says, fix it. So we put together an exhibit of all the different careers for women at the FBI. And we were just about to unveil it when I stumbled on the fact that a coalition of women's groups, 13 different women's groups, were going to be having a meeting in Washington. So I said to the director, why don't we invite them for lunch, give them a briefing about the FBI, and unveil the exhibit? Well, he thought that was a great idea. So we got them all there for lunch. We had a great lunch. And then we're ready to, and this exhibit, Chancellor, is enormous. I mean, it's like, 20 feet by 30. I mean, it's huge. And so he said, do you want everybody together as a group? I said, no, sir, I'm going to do each one individually with you. And he said, each one? I said, yes, sir. The group picture is great, but a picture with you and each individual CEO gets me the cover of their newsletter. So I made him do it 13 times. So we had to reset the shot, and he unveiled the exhibit. And after that, it became a joke, like, don't ask Merrie to do something because she'll make the director do it 13 times. But, we just celebrated Judge Webster's 100th anniversary last spring in Washington. He is still busy. He is still worth it. His wife made him stop riding at the age of 90 because she said, Bill, if you fall off that horse, you're going to break everything. And he did move from singles to doubles in tennis.
What a guy. He ran the FBI. He wanted to make sure that they were beyond reproach, that they were well thought of, and they followed the law, and they didn't make up cases or anything like that, and is to be commended for that. After you left the FBI, you went to the White House, and we're working with Jimmy Baker, who is a delight and one of the best persons I've ever known, and very effective. But talk about that a little.
Well, it took an intermediate step to the Federal Trade Commission, where I was the Director of Public Affairs. And that was a formative experience for me that I can come back to. But one of the things that impressed me there is because of the Federal Trade Commission, you don't have any money to spend for public affairs. It's a regulatory agency. So I had to use other things. But one of the things I went looking around to see is what the other divisions, what the other departments in Washington were doing to get their message out. And in all places, at agriculture, I discovered what they had set up a system with what was then Dial-A-Com. And for any of your listeners who are my age, they may remember the beginning of this. You took the phone and you put it in rubber cups, and you dialed into a dial, and it went me. And then in agriculture, they had set up an account with Dial-A-Com USA, and they had created agriculture news. So when you dialed into this service, up on this monitor came this thing that said agriculture news. And I thought, that's the future. I want this. So when Jim Baker, who was a really good friend of the FTC chairman, Jim Miller, called me over to talk to him, he said, Merrie, if we give you the media office, what do you want to do with it? I said, I want that. I'm going to create the White House News Service as a way around the White House press corps. So actually, Chancellor, it wasn't Al Gore. I invented the internet.
That's pretty good. What you set up the way to have great publicity and also not be bound by just what the national media is going to say.
That's right. I was the first person to do that. And you mentioned Jim Baker, who was critical in this because Baker, of course, as you know, he's a man of steel, but he's also not afraid to take risks. And one of the things I started doing at the White House were these satellite interviews because technology had just changed. And I worked with the Chamber of Commerce, which you couldn't do now, to use their studio and their satellite time. And we would do 2 cabinet secretaries and then the vice president. And then you'd get in line for an interview with the president. We'd do 5 stations in a row, 5 minutes for each interview. And the first one that we did with the president caused national news because the White House press corps went berserk. And they complained to Jim Baker, who called me in, and he said, tell me about this. So I explained what we were doing. And he said, you want to keep doing it? I said, yes, sir. He said, good. Just go do it. He's not afraid of anything. But he was, I had a lot of success in the White House, but that was also because I had so many people who were who supported President Reagan, and they wanted to help me out. So I got a lot of credit, but it's one of those things where I was just the beneficiary of a lot of other people's goodwill.
That's great. Baker, I always felt like he was great. And you said once that he was the best chief of staff that any president's ever had.
I think that goes without saying. Of course, I think, again, Mr. Baker deserves an enormous amount of credit because he was both an astute politician, but also an astute policymaker. But I think people have to go back to Reagan, who set up a system, as you know so well, Chancellor, with Ed Meese, Mike Deaver, and Jim Baker. So all 3 of them managed to, and then he basically said, you guys will work together, just get it done. So again, if I go back to my comment from Judge Webster, you have to set up a system where you hear things that people think you don't want to hear or that they don't want you to hear. And I don't think there's ever been a White House staff that was as well run as President Reagan's. And he was the instigator of it, but Baker certainly was the person who made it work.
He did make it work. And, the movie about Reagan that's out now is excellent. And Mike Deaver and Ed Meese, and Ed's still alive, and Jimmy Baker's still alive, were all good friends of mine, and I worked with them on the tax cut, and they were excellent. They were smart, they were aggressive, and the saying of the day, I want to go back to that I said that Dr. Kenneth Davis, who was a English professor at Texas Tech, told me, and I've used this one before. He said, in communication, oral or written, it's not important that people understand you. It must be so clear and concise they cannot misunderstand you.
That was a great quote.
He was an English professor and taught for over 40 years and was an excellent person. That if you had to do anything in communication, you were lucky to have been in his class. After you left the White House, what did you do next?
Again, can I make this sound a lot better than it actually was?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I teach at the Cox School of Business at SMU here, And I like to make it sound very strategic, as if I knew what I was doing. But the truth was, I just got lucky again. I set up my own company. Tex, my late husband, whom you knew and was a close friend of yours, an admirer, had come to be
Tex
a
Lazar, your husband, was a great guy. He was a brilliant lawyer, and I served with him on the Senate Judicial Evaluation Committee to evaluate people trying to get a federal judgeship or a U.S. attorney's job, and served with him and really loved him. He was a great guy.
Actually, Chancellor, his view is that you and Tex ran that committee together and handpicked the federal judiciary for a good part of the country, not just for Texas.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I appreciate it, especially coming from him.
But, well, anyway, so I got lucky. I set out with my own business without much of an idea. It's the truth. I didn't have any idea what I was doing.
But you left the White House and decided to go into business in communications, right?
That's because nobody else would hire me. So I said, I've had a very interesting life, as you know. I had a stint as a teenage movie actress, and then I had all that experience at ending up at the White House. So I set up my own business, and on our first day, our first appointment with our first prospective client was the company that used to be Southwestern Bell Telephone. And they were one of the first companies to encourage their own employees to be advocates. In those days, it was mainly for recruiting for jobs. But the CEO sat me down and he said, "You know what we've learned? The customer does not remember what we thought we told him." And I thought, have I missed this? But I realized I had spent my whole life thinking about what I wanted to say or what I thought somebody needed to know. And the minute you ask how much does your listener remember from what you say, a lot or a little, everybody knows it's just a little. So I wondered if anybody had studied that. That same week, we had calls set up with the Baylor Healthcare System out of Dallas and the National Audit Practice for the accounting and consulting firm Arthur Andersen, which was then based in Dallas. And they both hired us just based on this insight. But they gave us different assignments. Baylor said, "We don't do a good job getting everybody involved. Help us figure that out." And that grew in 3 decades to this concept that everybody that works for your enterprise talks about you. So the job is to how to enlist people, how to equip them, and how to deploy them. The Arthur Andersen people said, "This is a seminal insight, and we want you to develop a business model of communication so we can treat communication like any other business process, and then a methodology to teach it." And basically, those 2 assignments shaped 35 years of business for us, where we have our clients, as you know, all over the world, putting together, understanding who your various audiences are, how to influence what they hear, how to influence what they believe, how to influence what they remember, and how to enlist them as your company's proxy. And again, we've had wonderful assignments from great companies like FedEx, Baylor. You mentioned other universities. I guess I shouldn't say Ole Miss, should I?
That's okay.
But we've had a wonder, and I now have the great pleasure of being part of a company called SunWest PR, headed by a CEO named Creighton Webb, who, in my experience and personal involvement, is probably one of the best, if not the best CEO I've ever worked with or for. And we're setting up SunWest University so we can teach people how to teach my material. So I have a very exciting next chapter in my life, again, because somebody, in this case Creighton, believed in me and has given me an opportunity.
Part of your business is crisis management.
It is.
And that when a business has a crisis, something hits the front page of the news, I mean, it rattles everyone in the business and their consumers that trade with them. And touch on that a little about some of the things that you do. And I know you teach them the best way to handle a crisis is to avoid it. And you try to help people make sure they avoid it.
We do. What I try and tell my clients is the best way to encounter or deal with a crisis is to take a look beforehand at the risk that you're in and see if you are risk-proofed to survive a challenge. So, for example, if we took the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which I teach as a very interesting module, okay, The press covered that crisis with anecdotes, all the small businesses and individuals who had been hurt and put out of business. BP responded by listing lots of facts and statistics. Well, we've hired 3,000 planes and 12 million feet of. People don't care about that. They care about the stories. I mean, you know that. You are, if I might use a phrase, the greatest storyteller in Texas. They value stories. So the question is, have you collected and disseminated enough positive stories? Stories about the people that you employ, stories about the communities you work in. Those things all need to be thought through and memorialized before a crisis. And you'd be surprised how many companies don't do anything until after a crisis. The other thing that's really happened over the years, and I suppose this was inevitable, is that when something goes wrong or there's an accusation or an allegation, the lawyers today really are put in charge almost immediately. So our job frequently is to work with the lawyers and figure out what we can do that actually supports their work, because the penalties, if you have a problem so we're always saying it's not just the court of law, it's the court of public opinion. Today, as you know.
You're exactly right. And I can tell when there's not a public relations person involved or someone in communications in a lawsuit, because if the lawyers are, they're playing for a judge or 12 people on a jury, and they're not playing for public opinion. And that if you've got a good public relations group, if you've got a good communications group, then you can speak to the masses and not just one or two persons, and the message get lost, which happens so many times.
That's true. Of course, I am always advocating for involving a company's or an enterprise's employees, because they talk to their friends, they talk to their neighbors, and today with the advent of social media, the whole concept of media coverage has changed dramatically. For one thing, the news cycle, which used to be a daily 24-hour cycle, it's now lucky if it's 24 minutes. So you have to think very differently about it. We actually came to national prominence with a crisis many years ago called National Pipe and Tube. And they were a company that made in Liberty, Texas, and the little paper in Liberty is the Liberty Vindicator. I want to come back as the publisher of the Liberty Vindicator. And they made a product called seamless pipe. And in the 1980s, in the downturn of the oil patch, they ran into bankruptcy. All the other companies that made seamless pipe also ran into bankruptcy. So National Pipe and Tube's strategy was very simple. It was try and stay alive and let everybody else go out of business first. And that's actually what happened. But then, instead of being able to come out of bankruptcy, the Bankers Trust Company, under asset management, held title to their main piece of equipment. And this is a piece of equipment, Chancellor, as big as a football field. And they wanted to liquidate the company and sell the equipment. So we got hired by Arthur Andersen. I said, well, we've got to get outside of the established channels of decision making. So we got all the employees together and we started sending letters to the Bankers Trust chairman in New York. Please take our money and not our jobs. Please take our money and not our jobs. And we got local coverage. And we ended up on the front page of the New York Times with the first lead up. It was, bankers say there's nothing better in making a loan than getting it paid back, but apparently that's not enough for Bankers Trust. So we beat their brains, and eventually they caved and they signed the agreement, and National Pipe and Tube came out of bankruptcy. That's one of my favorite stories because it indicates what you can do when you work with the lawyers and public opinion, and you've got a good story to tell.
You got a great story, and you got it out there, and I remember, and you did an excellent job, and to be commended for that. You took a limited amount of statements and turned it into a complete part of the everyday life of that company. And the result was the general public agreed with you.
Absolutely. I also got made an honorary citizen of Liberty, Texas.
That's good. That's where Price Daniel was from. And his brother, who was governor of Guam, LBJ appointed him governor of Guam, I believe it was. And he was a character. He was a an unusual person. Merrie, as we close, I want to ask you something, that your company, give us the name and a little of what you do, but I'd like for you to tell that.
Well, the company is called SunWest PR or SunWest Communications. It's based in Dallas, and we like to say that we are Dallas-based but global in our impact. Our CEO is a guy named Creighton Webb, and the company, we have about 55 people. We have a very robust, broad range of services in a number of different industry specialists. I'm the founder of the training arm, and what we do, as you mentioned, is we put people through the courses that we've developed over the years, and we teach them we benchmark not only their personal communication skills, but we look at the communication philosophy of the company to see if there is a foundational aspect that we can track. Because today we tell people we have great expectations about them, not only for their personal communication skills, but in managing communications, both proactively and, as you mentioned, reactively. So that's what we do. If people look for it, they can find us on the web. I also publish a monthly memo called You Don't Say, which tracks the blunders and bloopers of the month. Very funny, but actually a serious training tool. And we look at the different comments. The most common mistake is repeating and denying and negative. And so we track the worst comment of the month, which we now call the I am not a crook comment, in deference to President Nixon's great comment, saying, I want the American people to know their president is not a crook. And of course, all you remember is the word crook. So that's what we do, is we help companies improve. We have long established relationships with great companies, and we're happy to talk to anybody who wonders how communication can be a competitive advantage for them.
That's great. And, I've seen you in some of your training sessions where you train people that how to answer questions. I've always been impressed with the way you handle that, to emphasize to people, this is the way you answer a question, and not in a negative way. And a lot of people, they get very negative when asked a question, and it just destroys their credibility.
So when we tell people you owe everyone a reply, you don't necessarily owe them an answer. But if you're perceived as ignoring them, then you're in big trouble because people jump to the wrong conclusion.
Right. Well, Merrie, thank you very much for being on. Our saying of the day is from Dr. Kenneth Davis at Texas Tech, that said that in communication, whether it's oral or written, it's not important that people understand you. It must be so clear and concise they cannot misunderstand you. We wish you the best, and we appreciate your friendship and all that you do in communications in America.
Thank you, Chancellor. It's a pleasure and a privilege.